I'm going to go ahead and get started while our last few people trickle in here. Welcome to our October meeting of the UALR ACS. Today we have 3 alumni, recent graduates from our chemistry department here to talk to us about what goes on at the Arkansas Department of Health. We'll start off with a few recent events. On October 5th, we did the Explore the Majors Fair. So we put together this display board just to recruit chemistry majors. For our faculty, if you want to use these images, they are available for a modest license fee. Just make the check payable to ACS. And on that, I made sure to have a list of where our graduates have gone, and I did not forget Department of Health. So thank you guys for coming back. The other recent event was National Chemistry Week. There we go. The 2011 theme, which we're going to administratively wrap up with this meeting, is Our Health, Our Future. So that was last week. We started off on Sunday we planned to do some science demos with the Central Little Rock Promise neighborhood, but this is Carol and us preparing. Due to circumstances beyond our control, this has not happened, so we're going to try and make up for it with science demos in the classroom. I'm working with the director of that, so if anyone has any inclination to help us out, please let me know, and we'll get some events set up. On Sunday, we did some chalk chemistry. I'm sure you guys saw our vandalism scattered around campus. This is looking down from my lab at the little plaza here. And we just tried to have a couple different ways to let people know it was National Chemistry Week. This is the amino acid sequence of insulin, and then the periodic table again, and then chemistry rocks, thanks to Erica. And if you look real close, you can see caffeine, everyone's favorite purine there, drawn out in huge scale out by the library. And some more stuff. This is the concrete chemical equation. And then, was it Tuesday? We had a rainy morning that also kind of went well with coffee and treats. So in the elevator lobby, if you came in that morning, we had free Starbucks coffee and baked goods courtesy of Erica and Jessica. And just like every year, we had the annual periodic table of cookies and cupcakes. This year we kind of spiced it up a little bit. So the cupcakes were for hardy elements, and they did not last very long. You can kind of see, if you look real close again, this is beta-D glucose. We're handing out lots of it. We're still doing the cell phone / printer cartridge, inkjet cartridge recovery recycling drive. It's a fundraiser for ACS. If you have any spare phones lying around, there's a collection box up on the 4th floor in the elevator lobby. We'd love to have them. We get a couple bucks for every phone, and that goes towards delicious food and or science supplies for classrooms or whatever else we decide to get into with ACS this year. We have some upcoming seminars. So tomorrow, Dr. Belford will have one on chemical education, the practice of science, in the dawn of the social semantic web. If you're a bit of a techie, then that'll probably be of interest. And then on the 11th, or the 4th and the 11th, the students who are going to the Southwest Regional Meeting of the ACS will be having seminars, and then on the 18th is Thomas Armstrong. We are on Facebook. If you are too, and you are not seeing this page, click that button, please. Tomorrow, between 9 and 10 and 12:30 to 1:30, UALR is having an open house at the Jack Stevens Center for incoming high school seniors and their parents. Love to see some chemistry students go out and see our booth there to talk to students who are coming in the next year, mainly just for recruitment purposes. I'd like to see them have an interest starting in the very beginning. And for November, we do not have a meeting because it's Thanksgiving, and we normally meet on the 4th Thursday of every month. But to make up for it, on Friday the 18th, I'm trying to put together a charity potluck with the science departments here. So working with the potluck food rescue and physics and biology and earth science and chemistry department, I'd like to kind of put together a whole bunch of food, eat a bunch of food, maybe bring some canned goods. We'll get the details of that sorted out here in the next week or so, hopefully, and get that rolling. Last minute addition here this morning was the announcement of a book grant award from the bookstore. So if you need some extra fundage for books next semester, this information here, I'll put it on Facebook here shortly. Another reason for you to go click the button. But it's up to $300 per application, I think. There's a total of 15 awarded. I have a couple of other last minute things before I get to this here. Our alumni here with us today from the class of 2001 are Dale Paulson and Suzanne Owen. She made sure I knew. And then last year's Janie Morgan Donaldson. There's also a job expo going on next week on the 3rd. So if anyone's interested in going to that, that's being held at the Verizon Arena. I'll put more information about that on Facebook also. And then if you are not currently an ACS member, we'd love to have you. There's some paperwork up at the front there. Fill out the yellow section so you can help us keep our numbers up, because I have to fill a report out at the end of every year, and the more recruitments I get, the better. And so with that, Dale and Suzanne and Morgan from the Arkansas Health Department.
Good afternoon, faculty and students of UALR. It's been a while since I've been here. Let's see. Chris, where did you put this?
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant to push that over. Just hit escape.
All right, there we go. So as Chris said earlier, I graduated in 2001 from here at UALR with a Bachelor of Science degree in Chemistry and Bachelor of Science in Biology. What we have here is a picture. This is our new lab facility, which we basically moved into in November of 2006. So we've been there almost 5 years now. Now this facility is really state-of-the-art. This is all glass front. Really beautiful when you're used to working down in basements and in darkness. It's really a nice change. This facility has approximately 80,000 square feet, and basically we have BSL 3, which is Biology Safety Level 3 facility inside the second floor. We also have Chemical Terrorism Lab, which actually has a blowout wall. If they process samples that may contain explosives, the idea is that the wall actually blows out and the analysts don't blow up. So that's pretty important to keep everybody safe. So this was built, we used to actually be next door, which was renovated office space. And so the laboratory wasn't really ideal. We had circulation of rabies testing going on in addition with other people having office space, and when you tend to get skunks in and stuff like that, people tend to complain. So they decided at that point that we really needed a new facility that was a little bit safer for everybody to work in. And this is the mission statement of the health department. It basically says, through our services, analytical training, and consultative, as well as our partnerships and applied research, we touch the life of every Arkansan. And this is basically true because we do testing in so many different areas. Basically, there's 136 employees within the public health laboratory. That doesn't include the main building, which employs a lot of physicians, nurses, and other support staff. The 136 is laboratory personnel, administrative staff, and just basically some of our support staff in shipping and receiving. These images here are taken in our specimen receiving. So you can see they're basically processing blood tubes. We have water samples being processed there at the top left. And they're basically looking at forms here, matching up forms to tubes. And you can see it's quite a process. A lot of samples come in on a daily basis. So these are the services that we provide. We have clinical testing, environmental testing, terrorism preparedness, and support services. Clinical testing basically is biological samples that will come in, which are often obtained through hospitals, some of our local health units, which we have approximately 91 throughout the state. They do a lot of, for example, STD testing. They'll have 1 day a week, they'll actually collect samples for various STDs, and those are submitted into our central laboratory here in Little Rock. Okay, this is the quality assurance department, and I think Mr. Darcy's probably familiar with that lady up there at the top. Basically, this is his wife, Pat Darcy, who's our quality assurance officer, and she does a terrific job keeping all of us in line for quality assurance purposes. Unlike research, we are under a lot of scrutiny. We have everything has to be documented. Basically, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. Everything, you have to look at expiration dates, reagents that go out of expiration date, you have to get rid of. You know, if you're caught with those in your laboratory, basically you get a mark against you, and so there's a lot of scrutiny involved. So basically the QA office monitors and ensures quality of all laboratory results. They assist with audits, and so we basically have monthly audits, and we kind of do internal audits within the laboratories. And they also review all of our proficiency tests. Basically, some of the regulating agencies include FDA, EPA, CLIA, and also CAP, which isn't on this list, but CLIA oversees all CAP, and CAP is the College of American Pathologists, which we just became accredited 2 years ago and just had a recertification last month, which went very well. And basically the QA office, Jeannie here, monitors 91 health unit laboratories throughout the state for CLIA compliance. Basically any samples that go through the local health units, they also have to abide by CLIA regulations. So it's her job to actually travel to all of these health units throughout the state, make sure they're in compliance. So it is very important she travels a whole lot. Okay, this is our specimen receiving, and here's, for example, this is one of our safety cabinets for processing samples. It has appropriate airflow. It's unlike a fume hood, it's basically used for biological samples, and the idea is that the airflow will go, you know, through the front and then up through a vent in the top, and it's just to keep the person working with the sample safe. Whereas a fume hood, basically everything's just vented straight out through the top, and you're not wanting those vapors in the laboratory at all. And so again, they're processing samples, and you see that they do a lot of different work. They process sort samples, so they get UPS, FedEx, the Postal Service. Samples come in a variety of methods. As I said, the courier service, we have a courier service that runs 5 days a week and picks up samples throughout the health units and delivers them to Little Rock. They also make kits for specimens, for example, flu kits that we send out throughout the state. They'll get those together, rabies buckets that go to veterinary clinics. And basically they receive more than 1,600 samples a day, so it's a pretty big process. Okay, these are some of our clinical services. We have newborn screening, immunology, serology, TB mycobacteriology, mycology, microbiology, and molecular biology. The immunology, serology does a lot of, well, they do the blood banking, blood typing. They also handle a lot of vaccine preventable diseases. For example, measles, mumps, rubella. They do ELISA type tests. TB are basically on patient specimens, and the TB lab gets a lot of prison samples. So a lot of these will actually come from prisons throughout the state. And molecular biology, I can speak directly for, because I kind of work in that unit as well. Handles a wide variety of things. They handle all of our bioterrorism stuff. They handle flu, and which was a big deal during the this recent swine flu pandemic. So that's a very, very busy lab. Okay, so let me just give you a breakdown of the newborn screening. Basically, they detect inherited genetic disorders in newborns, and this is a CLIA or CAP certified lab. They do phenylketonuria or PKU, and if you notice on this card, this is kind of a new method that they've gone with, and these are just from heel pricks from a baby, which is a lot better than taking a tube from a little newborn. So it's a newer method, and I believe it uses mass spec. And basically, they just do a heel prick, and they can run up to 26 different tests just with these blood spots. So it's really an advancement in the previous methods that they used to use. And they look at hemoglobin disorders, congenital hypothyroid disorders, galactosemia, and as I pointed out earlier, July 8th, they added 25 additional tests. Basically, there's a total of 176,000 tests on newborns, with almost 7,000 adults tested for sickle cell, which you can't see that at the bottom there. Now this is the immunology serology section. They provide testing for local health units and private clinics throughout the state. Again, this is a CLIA certified lab. And this is kind of a breakdown of just what they tested last year. So for HIV tests, almost 64,000, same with syphilis. And those samples are split out between those two tests. Hepatitis, almost 6,000. Blood typing, they do 17,000. And a lot of those are prenatal blood typing. And rubella, 4,700. And so you can see just how many samples they kind of get in batch. The HIV testing is kind of interesting because it's an automated system. So it's similar to an ELISA test, but it's all in a robotic setup, which is kind of nice because you're not having to handle blood constantly. You know, it has puncture mechanisms where it'll puncture the blood tube and process the specimen and run the test. Same thing with the syphilis as well. Blood typing still uses kind of the old method. You're looking for agglutination in the sample for blood typing. And again, the vaccine preventable diseases, rubella is one of those. They run ELISA tests. Now this is the mycobacteria TB and mycology lab. They used to use HPLC, which you can kind of see the chromatograph here. And what they've gone to recently is a PCR method, which is, it's going to save them a lot more time, especially for having to grow up an organism. TB is a very difficult organism to grow. It takes anywhere from 1 week to a month, which really, it kind of expands your turnaround time to get a result back to the submitter. So having the PCR technology, really they can take just a culture and run the test within 24 hours, they can have a result. So they've run over 3,400 specimens for tuberculosis, and mycology specimens, a little over 500. And both of those are very, very important. That's a mycology slide there. And of course, you can see she's gowned, gloved, masked, the whole 9 yards, which is very important. All this testing occurs within the BSL-3 suite, so it's really in a contained area because you don't want TB circulating in the laboratory. So, and unfortunately, some of the analysts have converted just from having worked with TB for so long. You know, that exposure, you will develop TB after time, especially if you don't wear your protection. So these are microbiology, some testing areas. And this is just basically microbiological isolates is what they pretty much deal with. But they'll get fecal samples and they'll isolate an organism from the sample. Again, this is a CLIA certified lab. They also support outbreak investigations. And I can kind of comment that recently we've had about 13 supposed white powder events from Northwest Arkansas. So this laboratory really has to do the first work on those samples to see if they're viable source. It's always funny when you get a white powder from a prison and you're questioning why are we getting this sample. So, but we have to take all the threats seriously. because back when the letters were circulating, we did receive some anthrax samples here in Arkansas. As a matter of fact, a kind of funny story is people were in such a panic at that point that we actually had somebody submit their whole mailbox for testing. So go figure, you know. It was negative, but still, you know. And also, they provide identification for really difficult bacteria. So these are isolates that come from hospital labs where they have gone through an entire workup and they can't determine what the isolate is. So they'll send them over to our laboratory, to the microbiologist, and they have to do a very extensive workup. It's done on just conventional biochemical tests, which Dr. Lynch is well familiar with, taught us a lot about that in biochemistry. And so they do it kind of the old-fashioned way. There are some automated methods that they're looking at and possibly moving some of this stuff to. And we also do in this lab prenatal screening for Group B strep. They ran approximately 544 samples last year. And they also identified parasites, and this is a lovely tapeworm here that they isolated. And those are kind of interesting to see. Those are kind of unique. You'll get worms and all kinds of stuff out of people. It's amazing. So they identified approximately 863 parasites and total 49,556 in all the testing in microbiology. And this is kind of the lab where I got my start, is molecular biology, the diagnostic lab. Most of these tests are CLIA certified. Let's see, this salmonella we're still kind of working on. I'm actually working on the bench, so my disclaimer is I'm not really a professional speaker. I do work on the bench as well. So anyway, they handle pertussis, and this is all by RT-PCR or PCR, depending on the organism. For a DNA organism, they do PCR. For an RNA organism, it'd be RT-PCR, which is reverse transcriptase. So you have to take an RNA to DNA, a cDNA template, and then amplify it. So for influenza, for example, that's an RNA virus. We have to do RT-PCR. And actually, there's a technique. So not to confuse you, but they have something called RT-PCR, which means real-time reverse transcriptase PCR. That just means that when you actually run these samples, and this is an example of one of the blocks that does the real-time, you get a fluorescent signal when there's binding, or basically the fluorophore comes off, okay? And that's what gives you your signal. So with real-time, you get real-time detection. So you can actually watch as each of those cycles occurs, you'll see it start ramping up if it's positive. So that gives you a really rapid turnaround time to get a result out. West Nile is what I'm involved in, and that is using an ELISA test, which is enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay. And basically what we're looking for are IgM antibodies in patient serum. And these are submitted throughout hospitals and clinics around the state. We're also looking at St. Louis encephalitis, Eastern equine encephalitis, and we're possibly going to bring on board dengue virus, which is predominant in the Florida Keys and down in Texas. So as far as West Nile goes, all of those are basically mosquito-borne viruses. And the key is just to, use your DEET. And unfortunately here in Arkansas, you almost have to use DEET year-round because we do have mosquitoes in December, unlike some other states. So the key to protection there is just keep the DEET on whenever you go outdoors. Norovirus, which is often associated with foodborne illnesses, BZV, Salmonella, and E. coli. Salmonella and E. coli are also bacteria involved with foodborne outbreaks. And Shiga toxin is related to E. coli and also Shigella. So a lot of times we'll look for specific toxins produced by E. coli to determine, if that person has been exposed to a strain of E. coli. And also adenovirus, and they also handle a lot of BT agents, which is bioterrorism agents such as anthrax, ricin, and so forth. So this is some other areas in the molecular biology unit, and they also use automation for the GC testing. And you can see it's huge volume, 71,000 specimens a year. and I would say they get about 300 to 400 per day. And basically, you're looking at a 3.6% positive rate for gonorrhea and 6.2 for chlamydia. So safe sex is very important, that's for sure. And then this also falls under pulsed-field gel electrophoresis, which is what they call DNA fingerprinting. Now, this laboratory, PFGE, actually gets their samples from the microbiology lab. They actually receive isolates. And what you see is just a gel pattern. And this is just, it's bacterial DNA that has been cleaved by various specific enzymes. And it gives you a pattern. Well, what we do is we send this pattern into a national database at CDC. And based on the pattern, it tells you the exact strain that you're looking at. So that way, for example, this recent listeria outbreak with Penelope, we can determine that the listeria that we see here in this sample is the same as one that occurred across the country. So that helps CDC to kind of link it together to determine the source of the outbreak. So it is a very important test, and it's really important that CDC kind of funds this and keeps it going. And they performed over 1,000 tests last year. They mainly look at E. coli, Salmonella, Shigella, Campylobacter, and Listeria. And these are the two areas that I kind of oversee. So under molecular, we have rabies, and last year we tested 942 samples with 39 positives. Now for rabies, you can kind of see these are the buckets that we provide to various veterinarians throughout the state. This is an animal test, so basically what we're getting in the buckets is an animal head. Dogs, cats, skunks, bats, you name it, we get a wide variety of animals. Unfortunately, you have to test from a post-mortem sample with this particular method. We use direct fluorescent antibody test, and we have to actually get to the brainstem and the cerebellum in order to test, so it gets pretty gruesome in there. But that's really the ideal way to look for that virus. There is no cure for rabies. And to avoid rabies, you need, in this state anyway, you need to avoid skunks and bats, is my take-home message. Basically, if you see a skunk or a bat in the daytime, avoid it. Call animal control, let somebody deal with it. Just kind of stay away, because those both are nocturnal animals. It's pretty rare to have a dog or a cat positive for rabies. We see about 1 out of 150 to 200 dogs or cats positive for rabies. So, the key again, if you have an outdoor dog or cat that stays outdoors, you should get them vaccinated. They made it a little more convenient because the vaccine is good for 3 years now instead of just 1 year. So you can actually get them vaccinated and have it good for 3 years. Arboviruses that I alluded to earlier, we test West Nile virus and St. Louis encephalitis, and that's done with serum and cerebral spinal fluid from human patients. And these patients are exhibiting clinical symptoms, headache, fever, those type of symptoms. Sometimes they'll have like meningitis or encephalitic type symptoms. So we tested approximately 705 last year with 55 positive. And it's kind of interesting because of our geographic location, we actually see, some years we'll see more positive samples for St. Louis encephalitis than we do West Nile virus. Now the viruses are in the same family, they're in both flaviviruses. But a big concern, like I alluded to earlier, is dengue virus. We have, a border state with Texas, and dengue is definitely down in Texas, in southern Texas, and in Mexico. And sometimes we'll get some people travel up to Arkansas or through Arkansas that may carry dengue virus. The mosquito species is here. It's Aedes albopictus is the mosquito that actually carries the virus. And unlike West Nile and St. Louis encephalitis, it doesn't require an intermediate host. With West Nile, your intermediate is a bird. So a mosquito will bite a bird, and then basically the mosquito can carry it from the bird and bite a human. So you have to have that intermediate host of the bird. So one of our surveillance methods that we still maintain capability for is actually testing birds for West Nile virus. Okay, now we're going to get on the environmental side, which I'll run through this, and if you have questions later, Suzanne and Morgan can probably answer them better than I could. So this is the environmental microbiology and chemistry food section. And basically, these are samples submitted by environmental health specialists throughout the state. I mentioned all the local health units we have throughout the state. Each one has an environmental health specialist attached to it, and they actually go out and investigate food, water, milk, rabies. They follow up on rabies cases too. So as far as microbiology, they've surveillance samples approximately 250 last year, and those can be from various restaurants that may receive complaints. For example, they investigate 35 complaint investigations. They can collect from samples like peanut butter, which has to be unopened, by the way. You can't just turn in an open jar of peanut butter because they don't know if it got contaminated somewhere else. So that's one of these keys, you know, if you suspect that you have a contaminated food source, it's best if it's unopened completely. If it's open, they really can't say that, you know, they came from the manufacturer. They can always say that it came from, you know, your hands or the environment it was in. So that's a key. If you think you have a problem, make sure it's sealed. Now, the chemistry provides tests for various preservatives, and this is what's going on here. Sulfites, fats. They do a filth analysis on insects and insect parts, and basically a filth analysis on excretia such as rodents. And they tested a total of 673 samples last year. As far as the environmental microbiology water, they receive a lot of different samples every day. Basically through public and city systems, they'll get samples submitted, for example, from the city of Maumelle or city of Dardanelle, for example, will submit a water sample. And also private individuals would be from wells, or if you have tap water that you suspect may be contaminated, but mostly from wells that people are looking at. They test quite a bit, 52,000 as far as the public and city systems, and over 11,000 for private individuals. And this is just one day's work. I mean, that's how many they do in a day. So, and this is the environmental microbiology milk lab. They test not only raw milk, also pasteurized milk. So they will take samples from Coleman Dairy and some of the other commercial sources. Basically, raw milk samples, they tested 2,500 last year, 360 pasteurized. They've done a total of 10,000 tests in the past year. This is also FDA certified lab. So you can see that we have a lot of different certifying federal organizations that come in and look at our labs and just make sure everything's squared away. This is organic chemistry, which is a EPA certified lab. Basically, they look at safe drinking water compliance and protecting community drinking water. And they basically are looking at EPA methods for VOCs, disinfection byproducts, pesticides, and herbicides. Total tests 14,212 last year.
Dale, with all the fracking going on up there in the middle of Arkansas, you get a lot of people sending in private well samples?
Yes, we have seen an increase due to the fracking,
So
which
you
is
find
obvious.
anything in it?
I don't believe so. There hasn't been enough to warn them to quit fracking. You know, time will tell. I mean, I'm a little concerned myself because some of those fractures run for miles underground. As a matter of fact, with some of the earthquakes they had, they were blaming it on the fracking, which was, you know, Greenbrier or north. Well, I live south of Little Rock, and I felt some of those little earthquakes, you know. So it's like, you know there's some underground fissures there somewhere. I mean, I'm 60 miles from the source, so. Radiochemistry, this is mainly focused around Nuclear One, around Dardanelle. This is EPA certified lab. They do test water and white tests. So they'll routinely sample around the nuclear facility to make sure it's still safe. They'll test, for example, if there's dairy cows around the Nuclear One, they'll look at the milk. They do air sampling, fish sampling from out of Lake Dardanelle. food sampling, and soil tests. And basically, they test for radium-226 and 228, gross alpha and beta emitters, gamma, uranium, and iodine. Total test 2,812 last year. Alcohol testing, everybody's favorite. Now this lab, it is a regulatory program for DWI and DUI analysis in the state. Recent news showed they actually, and I don't know if it was here in the state, maybe somebody can point it out, but there was some recent news that they had to basically reject a bunch of DUIs because their equipment wasn't certified. So the certification of the actual breathalyzers is done in this laboratory, which is absolutely critical. Those things will get off just like any analytical equipment. They'll shift a little bit and need to be calibrated. So this is an extremely important process, and it kind of alludes to the fact that if it doesn't get done, you're going to have a bunch of DUIs that'll just be totally dismissed. They repair and monitor breathalyzers, and a lot of times we'll have different police officers from throughout the state will bring in their breathalyzer equipment to have it certified. They also analyze body fluids, 1,205 last year, and it can be urine, blood, mostly blood is I think is what they focus on. They also train and certify law enforcement officers on how to use the equipment. Last year they certified 1,042 and trained 742 officers. Training and outreach, this is done primarily by Janice Thompson and her staff, and that kind of, the little red marks kind of show where they've done the outreach for the past year. And basically they have a network of laboratories and within the state and the public health laboratory. They have various drills, usually related to bioterrorism or chemical terrorism drills. And we include a lot of outside sources. Some of the folks out of Camp Robinson will participate often during the chemical terrorism or bioterrorism drills. And basically I think last year they visited about 25 healthcare facility laboratories, so that could consist of hospital labs or even small clinic labs. And they basically trained 222 clinical laboratories on biological and chemical terrorism preparedness. Okay, that's all I have. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, you said that you're a BSL 3.
Yes, we have.
So if y'all get like a BSL 4, like, really bad virus like Congo fever or something, do y'all have to go through like a decontamination because you like receive that before you ship it off to like a higher facility, or?
We would, that would kind of be handled in the triaging of the specimen. We take precautions, like it's the worst case scenario, and wear masks and gloves and gowns and so forth. If it was a BSL-4, we would probably have to decon the outer container, repackage it, and ship it off. There are very few BSL-4 facilities. I know there's some up in Maryland, and I believe they were building a new one down in Galveston. So that would probably be our closest source.
I have a couple questions. Well, first one, you talked about how they switched and went to some newer methods. Does the federal government, is that who comes in and tells you, we're going to do it this way from now on?
The laboratory has some leeway. Really the laboratory director has to look at the method we're currently using and determine, is it going to be worth doing a validation and establishment study to bring forward a new method, which it is pretty expensive to do. We have to a lot of times rely on our commercial suppliers. Sometimes we ask them, hey, can you give us some free kits, to help cut the cost, or can you find some positive samples, for example? And really that's at the direction of our lab director. Some of the older methods kind of need to be replaced. There's a need for that because, again, turnaround time is key. If it takes you a week to get a result out, well, it's not really worth much because the patient's well and gone on, So So really, I think the rapid methods are becoming more and more needed.
My other question is, you have so many samples coming in. Do you have like checks for mistakes? You know, because you know mistakes have to be made and false positives and stuff like that. So is there a way like you go back and analyze the last year and say, okay, like 10% of the things that we did were a mistake? And is there like some acceptable threshold that y'all have?
Well, first of all, they'll check the paperwork and the sample. I mean, that goes through several checks just in the data processing. We always look at the sample to make sure it's viable. Because of the regulations, there's very specific frame criteria for each sample type that you get. You know, there's specific storage conditions, for example. Like isolates that come in can't be refrigerated, whereas blood and serum and CSF and stuff like that has to be refrigerated. Some samples have to be frozen. You know, if it's DNA or RNA, they need to be frozen before they're sent. So a lot of that's kind of done up front before the test goes out. But another thing we'll do is sometimes if you have like a low positive, it'll be repeated, you know, to see if you still obtain a low positive. So some of the mechanisms are written within the operating procedures to verify a positive, for example. Yes, sir.
I have a couple of questions. One is your volume of samples is pretty large.
Yes.
So this is HTS type screening, is that right? High throughput, small titer plates, deteriorated for well, things like this,
Right.
ELISA based.
Right.
And then, so it is kind of like that, right?
Some of it is ELISA. Some of it is a different method. Right.
Do you do Fred analysis, Fred assays as well?
You know, I don't think so.
The reason, because I was kind of concerned about minimizing sample. I mean, I'm just curious. You know,
Mhm.
smaller the sample, and then better accuracy and signal to noise ratio. But going to a Fred than ELISA, because that's kind of like, I suppose it's based on SOPs, right? Because you got to have
Right.
it well mapped out.
Right.
And my other question is, ELISA is notorious for giving false negatives.
Sure.
So how do you get around? You have 50,000 samples.
Mhm.
Maybe 5% are going to give a false negative as a really positive.
Right.
And they go back as being negative.
Right.
You have to check for that.
Well, for example, the HIV testing, we have the biorobots. We have 2 of those set up that run the high throughput. Well, anything that's positive, they run Western blots to verify, so the bands will determine that it is a true positive. Now, for the arboviral testing for West Nile, St. Louis, we actually we use a viral and normal antigen. So basically, we're looking at a ratio.
Internal check.
Right, we look at a ratio, plus we have a blank Wells that subtracts all the background fluorescence. So it's kind of done internally within the reader. And there again, if we have an equivocal or low positive, it's automatic that we repeat it, right? And if it repeats equivocal, it's reported equivocal. So, yes.
Are you seeing a lot of dengue virus type of samples here in Arkansas?
Well, recently, actually, I worked with a company that actually put out the first commercial dengue kit for an ELISA. And we did a retrospective analysis of over 200 samples from back to 2005. Out of those 200, there were 6 positive, but they weren't confirmed by CDC's gold standard method. So it has us questioning, it looks like the specificity is slightly different between this commercial kit and what CDC has. So CDC couldn't confirm any of those 6, but they did find one additional one. And I think it's more travel related than circulating here in the state. But it's a concern because, as I said, the mosquito species, Aedes species, is here in the state. We picked it up since 04, 05. So,
Those are huge mosquitoes.
Right, right. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, say like in the future I want to send a sample.
Mm-hmm.
Can I go to the website and will it tell me, like, depending on which lab it needs to go to, like what the preferred method?
Right,
for sending that is?
we put out a directory of services on the website, and it gives specific storage conditions, how to collect it, what kind of tube or vial, or you may have to go to the health department and actually pick up a bottle or something to put the sample in. And again, it'll provide very specific instructions. And what I did, I brought this, they're working on revising this. This is the fiscal year 2010, but this is an actual guide to our program and services. And I'll just leave this up here if y'all want to look at it. It gives a lot of detailed information and additionally more testing information. I just kind of gave a just quick run through of what the laboratory does, but they really do a lot to protect everybody's health here. So,
I have one more
yes, sir.
question.
Sure.
You see those reality shows in which these people are saying, like, this guy says that's not my kid, and the other ones, do you do that kind of testing as well?
No, that's more done. Now they do have some home tests, genetic tests, and I think it's based on ELISA technology. As a matter of fact, my PowerPoint was broken on my computer, but I was going to download a video that was a homebrew home pregnancy test, and it was an ELISA method. So it was kind of interesting to say, but there's an actual video on the web that kind of shows you how the ELISA works and so forth. So. Yes, sir, back in the back.
So as chair of the department, I want to thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. And the other thing I was going to question, what are things our group's been looking at is natural activity? And I know your samples, and you probably got the radiochemistry, you're probably not familiar with that because it was,
Right, I'm not on the environmental side.
But we'd be curious to find her here at some point in time. You can have Dr. Miranda call me back sometime. I really would like to know about whether or not routinely looking at natural radioactivity levels in your water samples. And the reason I'm saying that is because there's fracking that's going on. I really anticipate if they do start fracture flow and stuff, there is, as you probably all know, in hot springs, a lot of natural radioactivity in some of the ground systems. When you free that up, you get organic colloids, and Dr. Braun and I have found that those things actually help the larger radionuclides to migrate.
Right.
And so you may start seeing higher levels of uranium, thorium, and radium things, which may be good indicators of that kind of transport that's happening. I don't know that anybody's really thinking about it.
I don't think so. It's something definitely we need to look at, I think. And, it may require some additional drilling and getting into some of that groundwater to look at.
One area that's interesting is the hot springs area when these guys, they finally stopped them from dynamiting out there for the new road. Part of that reason was people were getting hot water in their wells.
Yeah.
But I don't think anybody's ever gone back and looking there to see what kind of natural radioactivities in those wells they had before and after to see if you can use that as an indicator of the kind of.
Right.
Question back on when you're talking about infant testing, determines that you actually carry that test out. Infants born in a hospital, are they going to send that test to you, or do they do that themselves in the hospital? Who are you testing?
Hospitals.
Okay,
Yeah.
so hospitals do send it.
Right. Hospitals will send those. It's just basically a card with the blood spots. And basically, they used to have to collect an actual tube of blood. But with this method, they're able to test just with those blood spots.
And do they test every infant that's born?
Yes. Automatically.
And all those come through your lab?
Yes. Yeah. All through the newborn screen.
All the babies in the whole state, not just in Little Rock.
Whole state.
Oh, I have one more question.
Sure.
Do y'all have a lawyer on staff?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, as far as regulations, I don't know if y'all caught the news, our lab was shut down at one time because of poor proficiency test. And, that's one thing that I personally witnessed, and basically when you get a proficiency test, you're supposed to test it only in your laboratory. Well, they didn't like the results and they sent it to another lab, combined the results, got them in big trouble. So at that time we were under CLIA, which is Clinical Laboratory Improvement Amendment, which is monitored by the Center for Medicaid Services. So they're looking for fraud, is what they're looking for. It's a federal agency. Well, basically we went through that and got reaccredited through CLIA. And these inspectors were very, very tough. You can look at a instruction manual for a test, for example, or an operating procedure, and have a clear interpretation, and this instructor or inspector would interpret it out in left field somewhere, and you're going, how did you get this? It just doesn't make sense. So at that point, we made the decision to get away from these inspectors and go to CAP. Well, CMS oversees CAP, but CAP is its own group of inspectors, and one of the nice things about the College of American Pathologists is they are specific to the fields that they inspect. So for example, this last inspection, you had some molecular biologist inspecting the molecular biology lab. So they're familiar with that test. These CMS inspectors, they might not have a clue about molecular biology. Their expertise may be virology, but they're trying to interpret a totally different test. So it was a great move on our lab director's part to move us over to CAP, and it's kind of interesting because within the region of these two inspectors, almost every state lab has now moved to CAP because of the same problems that we face. So, again, it's totally different, you know, when you go from research to clinical or environmental testing under these regulatory agencies. So. And again, I'm going to leave this up front if anybody wants to take a look at some of the other services we offer. Just leave it up here.
Well, thank you, Mr. Paulson.